Hi, this is Adrian. A couple of experiences came up recently that I'd just like to talk about. Um, I'll start with a story I had the other day where I basically was pulled over by a traffic police officer, and I was given a ticket by the officer for speeding. And I was angry about it. I was pissed off about it. I was able to find all kinds of reasons why it was unjust, and how it really makes no sense. How these laws don't necessarily serve anybody. They're not necessarily designed in the best interest of everyone equally. Specifically, actually, because I got another ticket which was for littering, but that was actually especially bogus. It was a piece of paper had flown out of my car, and I got $100 fine for it. So I was upset. I was in outrage, and how dare they? And isn't that such bullshit? And that's true. But what ended up happening was I began ranting and raving about the system and how fucked up it is, and going down that rabbit hole, which again it does become pretty endless, because there's just so many things wrong with the world that you're able to find about wrong with the world. But what I noticed about the way in which I was expressing it was that it was very much fueled by energy. It was a very energetic expression. There was a lot of anger. There was spitefulness. So really, I had to look at why I was reacting that way. I couldn't help but see why I was really reacting that way, and I realized that it was simply because I was angry because something happened to me in my life where I had to pay money, and I had this fear within me of losing money, of not having enough money. That's based in fear of survival. And so all of my anger and outrage was basically just based in personal fears and insecurity, and within a complete acceptance of those fears and insecurities, almost like justifying it in a way with all my anger and resentment and spitefulness and everything. So I basically just realized that within that, my whole starting point for looking at the system, for looking at why everything is so corrupt, and trying to be effective in looking at these points, was essentially a form of self-interest. Because again, as I just outlined, this fear was about my survival. It was about my life. It was about, what if I don't have enough? And what I realized within that was that, as I often realize about myself, I was emotional about it because it was based in that self-interest. I was not reacting to this problem as though it is an actual system problem, meaning and implying that it affects everybody equally, and is affecting everybody equally, and affecting many, many people in far worse ways than it is affecting me. Far, far worse ways. So, in self-honesty, you have to ask yourself the question, why do I not live, why am I not being considerate of them in the same way? When I am fully aware that this is going on, that people are being abused constantly and far worse than I am, why am I not having the same emotional reaction and everything, and reacting the same way I was for myself, for everybody else, on the behalf of everybody else, on the behalf of the injustice and everything that is done unto everyone else, and the consideration of how much everyone else is, suffering and what they're enduring. And a big part of that is how we're conditioned, how we're brought up. Really in a way, and that is again another mechanism of the system, is to be brought up in a way where you are only concerned with yourself and you are only affected by something when it touches you personally, and again, maybe it puts you in that state of fear or discomfort or whatever it is. But the point is, it's only when it reaches and bothers you, because that's all all the outrage and the whole morality about it, that's all it's based on. It's just you, and you alone. And I mean, isn't that the problem that's got us all here in the first place, is that self-interest and that greed? I mean, we've been conditioned and brainwashed to be this way for a very, very long time. Since really in our whole lives. And the reason I'm sharing my own story here, is because I see this all the time. These same you can, I guess, call it misguided efforts to look at things and deal with problems in is that, like, with all the the protests going on around the world, and all the civil disobedience and all the outrage, amongst individuals in this world, that is the trend, is that it's always only when it affects and touches a person or some people's lives personally, because of this condition that I just outlined. And because this is the case, just like in my story, all the subsequent activism and talk and trying to deal with the points, the problems, and find solutions and everything that follows is sabotaged in a way, because it's all purely based on this self-interest point. Where this whole definition of self is, again, only purely ever concerned with just you and your own life. And that's where I find a lot of the anger and the outrage is coming from, is because perhaps people are in a way angry at themselves for not seeing the bigger picture already. When things tend to touch people's lives, when problems societal problems tend to affect people's lives personally too, it also tends to come as a shock, and that's another thing. And again, I understand that we are all conditioned to be selfish and only be concerned with ourselves. But the fact remains is that we have been well aware all along that others have been suffering. Like, really, we've lived this way, especially in richer countries and richer echelons of society. We've been well aware that the rest of the world is fucked and burning. And it's really only now that we're doing anything about it. But even then, are we really doing anything about it? Because have we really changed the essence of who we were back then, where we allowed this to go on already? Have we really changed that about ourselves to be able to actually deal with the problems now effectively? And that's what I'm not seeing, is we haven't. Because that really requires self-honesty, and to admit yourself as part of the problem first, and recognize how you've been, like, literally part of the problem, part of the system. You've been brainwashed. I mean, maybe unwittingly, but again, in terms of everybody just only ever being concerned with their own self-interest. And I find nothing is getting done as a result. Yeah, sure, people are protesting more, but we're just writing more laws to react to that. We're just going to throw more people in jail. I mean, you can't fight the system as though you're separate from it, because as I just outlined, everyone really becomes, in terms of the characters that we become, made in the image and likeness of the system, or product of it. And so you can't separate yourself from these points and fight the politicians and blame the governments, blame the corporations, blame whoever. Much more effective is to simply slow down, stop all the reactions, the anger, the spitefulness, because again, these are the points that got us here in the first place, and actually have a look at the part you're playing in terms of just being honest with yourself. And who am I? What are my desires? What are the things I fear to give up? How have I separated myself from others? Being honest with yourself this way and actually looking at the shit as yourself. You are the shit. Is much more enabling, because you are able to understand the problems out there somewhere. We're created for the same reason. Anyways, that was pretty much the whole point. I would suggest to anyone who is seeing and finding what I'm talking about that the protests aren't getting anywhere. The raging against the machine isn't changing anything. It isn't making anything better. Have a look. I would suggest to anyone that is able to give up their egos enough to see this point, to investigate self-honesty and self-forgiveness, which is something that I was able to discover and study through Destiny. If you're able to visit destiny.org, and also equalmoney.org as well, because equal money is essentially a solution that is based within this whole principle of self-honesty, admitting yourself first. I mean, essentially equality, right? The equal money system is essentially a real solution that is being presented in recognition of this point that we are all equally responsible. We're all equally part of the problem, and we are all equally life. We are all equally here as one, together as individuals, as life. Thanks very much.